This. This is 60 rolls of toilet paper, and you might be wondering, why in the world am I showing you a picture of toilet paper that I bought? Well, a few weeks ago, I was at the store and I came across a deal that I literally felt like I had hit the lottery. And yes, it was over toilet paper. I was so excited that I couldn't wait to tell the mom that I spotted in self-checkout who had two little ones of her own. I was so excited that I had to snap a picture of my daughter standing next to it. I was so excited that I sent a follow-up message to my friend who lived 30 minutes away to make sure she wasn't going to miss the deal at her store, as if it was breaking news. You know, by the time I got to my car, I started to ask myself a question, and I was wondering, where did that come from? It came out of nowhere. This moment really stopped me because joy like this hasn't always been a part of my story. And to give you a little bit of context, I've been stuck in survival for most of my life. But when I reflected back, I came to realize something that really meant something to me. And that was how God was reminding me that he is with me through this storm that I'm facing and all the storms from the past, and that I'm allowed to feel joy. Um, but that these tiny moments of joy still break through. My life hasn't always been easy. I haven't always been aware of these tiny moments of joy or capable of grasping how important they would later become to me. I've lived a life that focused on surviving. Can any of you relate to this? It's okay to admit that most of us are living in some form of survival, whether it's work or school, parenting, finances, or the pressures of keeping up with everyone's expectations. Saying it out loud actually takes some of the shame out of it. And because we find ourselves in that mode, we start waiting for these big moments, the ones that our expensive vacations or the promotion or the perfect moment that never seems to come. For me, I didn't grow up with what most people would call a typical family setup. My grandma took me in when I was only a couple months old and raised me as her own. She was a single grandma getting her second wind at parenting, and she worked hard every single day of her life. She gave up her golden years to raise me, and not just me, but two other cousins that were in similar situations. But she provided stability and love, and as much as she could, she would take us places and provide this life that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And it wasn't simple. My biological mother was never around. My dad was in and out of my life, and I didn't really fully understand any of that. I knew that addiction was involved with that, but it wasn't until other kids noticed that, you know, I didn't have a mommy, or like they all had mommies, and I didn't. But one thing in elementary school that I look back on is when I asked my grandma if I could call her mom, and that was like the best moment in my life, at that time. And that moment shaped me more than I realized. It was the first time in my life that I really felt chosen and loved. Um, but as I got older, my mom's sheltering of me eventually she had to let me go because, I was older and experiencing the world. And, I found myself facing many challenges that shaped the way I viewed myself and others, and I drifted, I rebelled, I disconnected, I learned to survive on my own strength. I fell into addiction that I swore I would never do. But I carried this belief that belonging wasn't part of the in the cards for me. So going back to this toilet paper thing, this was a big moment for me because I've been stuck in survival. I've had a difficult time even coming up for air sometimes. But I am here to tell you that joy can absolutely show up on aisle 9 in Safeway. It can show up in the most ordinary, unexpected, spontaneous ways. At least that's what God has been teaching me lately. I've had to learn this over time, but I have found joy in some of the most unexpected ways lately, like a chicken nugget, a potato, a heart rock, my children, and many other tiny but big unsuspecting moments. You know, Let me ask you something. When was the last time that you had a toilet paper moment? Or where have you been so busy that you missed something good? I've had to learn that there is meaning in our everyday existence and that every day matters and nothing is by accident. God has this way, excuse me, of stepping into our lives long before we're ready to step toward Him. And for me, that moment came in one of the hardest seasons of my life. But He has always been there. I just didn't realize it. But even in those difficult moments, God was there with me and He is still giving me moments of joy. I just have to come up for air long enough to breathe and notice. So, this is your reminder and mine that we are allowed to feel joy even when life is heavy. We're allowed to pause even though our brains are wired for crisis. And we are allowed to step out of survival even if it's through toilet paper.